Professor Merkel, thank you very much for accepting this interview for Citizens Channel. I'm really honored to get to interview you. First of all, welcome in Albania.
So it's my pleasure to be here and to talk to you.
Is it the first time in Albania?
It's my very first time. Unfortunately, I will be here only for 3 days, but I have the firm conviction that I will come back for some more times to get to know closer your wonderful country.
What brought you here, Albania?
Interest, I would say. I'm very much interested in young democracies. When do young democracies success, coming from dictatorship, transiting to a democratic regime? This is what I'm professionally interested in. And Albania is a country where you had a very specific, I would say, Stone Age communism in the 1960s, 70s, and even in the 1980s, how such a country can make it to become a working democracy.
Politicians in Albania say that we're living in a democratic country. They keep saying it every day, and they have been saying this for 27 years now. But with the information that you have and with what you have been seen and what you have been heard these days saying in Albania, is it true that we are living in a democratic country?
I would say this is only half the truth. There are basic democratic institutions. You have general free election. Whether these elections are fair, it's a different question. So you have working democratic institution, at least in a formal sense. This is the one side, the positive side. But there is another side. Democracy lives from the elites and from the citizens. Mm-hmm. And here I see still some problem for your young. And I would immediately add to it somehow defective democracy. So you are not like Sweden or Finland or Denmark. It's a different animal we find here in Albania. So we developed a concept where you have democratic institutions, but these democratic institutions have certain deficits. Mm-hmm. We call it sometimes defects. For example, in your country, one would immediately say you have problems with your judiciary. The parties are colonizing too much other institutions. There is a dominance of the executive, and there is corruption. So these are certainly elements which do not work very much. So I would qualify your political regime as a defective democracy, closer to democracy than to an autocratic regime, but still has to go quite a long way to become a stable, liberal, and really working democracy.
Mm-hmm. If we compare these defects that you mentioned for Albania, do we find the same defects also in other countries of the Western Balkans? Or it's another situation?
Certainly. I would say from these countries on the Western Balkan and even Eastern Balkan, probably you have only 1.5 really working democracy. I would say it is Slovenia. Mm-hmm. This is a democracy where we would expect quite a stable future, and the quality of democracy is not that much different from many of the West European countries, and I would consider it even a better democracy than, for example, Greece. Mm-hmm. So you have such an example. Croatia would be the half country where you have a working democracy. It's still a way to go, but it's further developed than, for example, Albania. Mm-hmm. But this is no wonder. First, Croatia and Slovenia, they are economically better developed, and there is a close relationship. The higher the economic development, the greater the chances we have a democracy. Mm-hmm. This is one point. And the way these two countries had to go from the from the Tito regime in the 1960s and 70s and after the Civil War is much shorter than Albania, where you did not have any of these structures which had an affinity or similarity with democratic institutions. But I do not want to talk only about institutions. It's very much about the people themselves, the people who have developed some civic virtues. You had a kind of civil society, and this is what you have developed in your country, and this takes time. And even 27 years, we could say it's quite a long time. However, we know other countries in Latin America, in Asia, and even now in Eastern Europe as well, which did not make it really to a democratic, working democratic system. So some patience and some critical optimism, I think, is in place if we are talking about Albania.
This process of democratization, if I can call it like this, it's been going now for 27 years, and it's a long transition, and people in a way they are, how to say, they're getting bored of this thing, transition. We want some stability. How we can reach stability?
But this is a $1 million question. Maybe you have a certain kind of stability, but it's not a complete democratic stability. So it's somehow in a gray zone next to a liberal democracy. As long as the two major political parties, the Socialist Party and the Democratic Party, and even including other parties as well, as long as these parties instrumentalize basic democratic rules of the game, are playing with institutions, are changing too often the constitution, then stability cannot really take ground. So it's very much up to these major players, the two big parties, whether democracy in Albania can take firm roots and can develop sustainable stability.
You mentioned two parties, the main parties that are in Albania, and they were, how to say, the first parties when the democracy was established in Albania in '90, when the communism fell. But now in Albania we have 64 parties registered, and more or less they are, how you call it, the catch-all parties. How do you see this trend in the future of the parties? Are we going? What do you think? Are we going to see new parties coming up, or the consolidation of all the parties?
I would first say these 60 registered parties do not tell us very much. You will find in all the other countries many parties which are registered, but which are completely irrelevant for the political development. So you can have these minuscule parties, but they will not have any impact on the development of democracy. So we should talk about those parties which made it to the parliament, which are represented in the parliament, and then the number is tremendously smaller. So I would not very much look to these little, tiny, irrelevant political parties. We have to look to the major players. What from an outside observer is quite astonishing, that we have these two big parties. They move to the center of the party system. You really cannot distinguish between a leftist and a rightist party. Sometimes the Democratic Party is even more social than the neoliberal, in economic terms, the neoliberal socialist parties. So if you have two parties migrating and transiting to the center of the party system, one would expect that there is political space at the left and at the right. But there are no obviously creative political entrepreneurs enough to fill this political space. This hints to the fact that obviously the big two parties are monopolizing to a large extent the political competition here in your country, and this is not very good. So I think you need new parties which bring new ideas, incentive, and a new style of politics into the political game. And here probably there is some need for more political innovation. You have these on the left, Libra or LSI, groups which split it from the socialist parties, but they have to develop their own style. And maybe they do. This is quite early to say, and this is something you may know better than me. I'm just astonished as an external observer that they can move so much to the center of the party system, and there are not emerging strong new parties on the right and to the left.
With the new political parties, is the situation that people are losing trust in the parties. It was made in a study lately, and people are losing trust in the parties, in the parliament, in the state institutions. So how people can, how the people can join or this new way of doing the politics, like you said, how to attract people to those new parties?
There are two questions. The first one is the low trust into those institutions and organizations we the citizen can vote for. This is a kind of democratic paradox. We vote for political parties, we can vote the members of parliament, and directly or indirectly also the members of government. But we do not trust them. If it comes to other institutions, at least if we look to Europe as a whole, to Western and Eastern Europe, there's a high trust in those institutions we cannot vote for. Means at least strong in the Western side, in the judiciary, in the police, in the military, in churches. So we trust more these state or para-state organizations which are not part of the competitive democratic game. This is a paradox.
Why?
Yeah, it is certainly a kind of disappointment. Political parties are campaigning against each other, and they promise to solve political problems, and often they cannot do it. Simply because they do not have the resources, or major decisions are already decided by international markets, by international actors and regimes, global investors, and especially in a country like yours, a pretty small country, you have to be open to external investors, and sometimes they are more powerful than the national government. But the national parties have to tell the people, we are governing, we have solution for all the problems in health, in education, in reducing poverty, in reducing inequality, but often they fail, and this creates disappointment. What can we do, or what can experts recommend to a young democracy if the political parties are not the most innovative actors? Certainly one has to say, start to engage yourself, go into political organization, strengthen the civil society, play a more active role, and especially the young people do it. the young people do it. They do not join very often political parties anymore. They join Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, environmental organization, and if you are on the left, maybe ATTAC and these kind of organization. And this helps because you influence the political agenda and you can drive to some extent political parties. This is underdeveloped in your country as in many post-authoritarian regimes, but this is certainly something a democracy needs in order to control political parties, to monitor democracy. And I think in the digital age where you can use the internet for all these initiatives, you can create links between the people, organizations, platform, and networks. There is a chance for filling a new, modern, and even digital civil society where the political parties cannot completely neutralize them from. So this is what one can recommend, especially to young people.
Yes, exactly. Stepping to the young people. There is a problem not only in Albania, but in the countries of the Western Balkans. They are leaving their countries for a better future in the West. The numbers are really big, especially in doctors, IT engineers, not only in Albania, but also from other countries. But this is this potential. It's going away from the region. And how do you see the future of Western Balkan in this process of integration and with the situation that everybody wants to go away from here and not to stay here? The most active part of the society that can change something.
This is certainly a problem, and I openly confess I do not have an easy solution for that. If I would have it, I would not be mediocre paid professor. I would have a much more prominent role. The so-called brain drain, meaning the well-educated people leaving economically underdeveloped countries to richer countries, is a phenomenon you cannot avoid in an open world of open societies. If you have open borders and you are a well-educated doctor and you earn in Sweden or Germany or France or Great Britain 20 times as much as in your country, then many of the well-educated young people will leave the country. So I think what you have to do is to create a fruitful atmosphere where the people see a chance to stay in their country, where they do not simply follow an economic incentive. And normally after a certain period of economic development, they may not come back, but you can keep many more people at home. But it depends very much on the labor market. It depends very much on the flourishing of the economy. So external investors, including the European Union, have to support such a country like Albania to create a more productive environment for the people to stay. And you don't easily leave your home country. You have a preference to stay. However, one has to have a future in this country. And up to now, I do think the political forces did not always do what they should have done in order to keep you at home and provide good opportunities for making a good and decent living in your country.